All right, I'm heading out. And don't you do anything unnecessary.
With those final words aimed at Eric, Percy, who was set to go on a company trip starting today, left. The sound of the front door being slammed shut made Eric shiver, gripping his own hands tightly in fear. Just from this, it's clear how Percy usually treats Eric. Knowing Percy would be away for a while brought us a brief sense of relief. As I was about to head to the living room to prepare breakfast, Eric tugged at the hem of my clothes, something he's never done before. Surprised, yet I met Eric's gaze.
Mom, actually,
Eric hesitantly reached out his hand to me. In his hand was a mobile phone I don't recall ever buying him, and on its screen was something unbelievable. I quickly took the mobile phone from Eric's hand and stared intently at the photo displayed on the screen. "What's this about?" When I asked, Eric tightened his lips and fell silent. "It's okay," I encouraged, prompting him to reveal another shocking piece of information. "My name is Jane, a 32-year-old office worker. 3 months ago, I married my husband, Percy. The reason I got married was because of Percy's intense pursuit. The chance meeting that led to our marriage traces back to a year ago. Percy came to my workplace on business, and I happened to be the one who dealt with him. In our company, we don't have a receptionist per se. Anyone who's available attends to visitors. Although this would normally apply if you weren't in a different department, my department is the General Affairs Department, so doing anything and everything is part of the job. Percy needed to see someone from the sales department, but they were unusually busy that day, so no one was available to meet with him immediately. So while I was attending to Percy, I was also managing my other tasks. But Percy, undeterred, kept talking to me. Sitting in the guest seating area, sipping on coffee meant for visitors, he would call out to me, seated just within his view. Gradually, we became friendlier and deepened our relationship. Every time Percy visited on business, he would talk to me, leaving with a cheerful goodbye. One day, after many such visits, he asked me out for a meal with a serious look, an invitation I was happy to accept. That was 6 months ago, and since then, we've gone out to eat together frequently. During one of our meals, when the mood felt just right, he told me about Eric. Percy's previous wife had passed away, and he mentioned how sorry he felt for Eric being alone. Hearing this, I wanted to help in any way I could, and offered to marry him. After getting to know Eric and becoming friends, we finally got married 3 months ago. Although the marriage was a happy milestone, Eric's behavior began to change shortly after. He started apologizing to me daily, and when I asked why, he would just remain silent. What surprised me the most was the drastic change in Percy's attitude after we got married. Before the marriage, needless to say, he was a gentleman, kind, gentle, and cheerful, but after the marriage, he became very rough. He's loud and rough in everything he does, making a lot of noise and using harsh language. Whenever he wants something from me, he summons me abruptly and speaks in a commanding tone.
Hey, is dinner not ready yet? I'm tired from work over here.
Even though I'm tired from work as well, he never shows any intention of helping. Instead, he treats me like a servant and is harsh on Eric too.
Hey, don't mess up the house. Stepping on those parts, huh?
He'd kick away the blocks Eric was playing with, destroying what he had built. Then, when Eric looks sad, he yells,
"What's with that attitude?"
Of course, with such behavior, Eric wouldn't even try to talk to him about apologizing. Hey, about Eric's habit of apologizing.
Be quiet. I'm tired from work. Don't bother me with such trivial matters.
He dismisses it outright, and the conversation gets nowhere. This exchange has happened several times, each time ending with him getting annoyed and yelling. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Don't you care at all about your own child? When I say this, Percy shrugs dismissively, as if speaking to a young child.
He's not my child, so don't worry about it.
Even though he says that, it's wrong because I knew he was Percy's stepchild when we married. I was about to retort when my eyes inadvertently caught sight of the living room door. Eric was silently watching us through the gap in the door. Seeing me swallow my words, Eric quickly left the living room. Percy, not noticing this, thought he had won the argument and smirked before going to his room. I hardly slept that night, but morning comes regardless. I slowly got out of bed and started preparing breakfast. I'm not making breakfast for Percy. In fact, Percy hardly eats in the morning and stubbornly refuses to. The reason I'm preparing breakfast is for Eric, and my portion is just by the way. Yet when Percy sees the breakfast I'm making, he immediately starts complaining.
Are you really going to feed him something so greasy first thing in the morning? That'll give him heartburn. Stop it.
Percy makes a disgusted face as he looks at the potatoes I'm frying. As I was considering continuing from where we left off the day before, Eric appeared in the living room, passing by Percy. The moment Percy was out of sight, Eric looked up at me and apologized.
Mom, I'm sorry.
His expression was downcast as he whispered, and I turned off the gas to look at him. I wanted to understand the meaning behind Eric's apologies today. You don't have to apologize. Hey, why do you always say sorry? You haven't done anything wrong, have you? I asked Eric with a slightly troubled look, but he just shook his head repeatedly without saying anything. Then Percy came back into the living room, and Eric immediately started helping with breakfast. No matter how many times I asked, Eric never told me the reason. Eric didn't start apologizing to me from the beginning. It began about a month after I married Percy. He often apologized when Percy wasn't around, and at first I was desperate to find out more from Eric. But every time, Eric would dodge the question or act as if nothing happened. Moreover, it seemed like Percy had scolded him about it a few times, so now he only apologizes when Percy isn't there. Eric never telling me the reason left me feeling troubled. This time was no different, and I sighed secretly while preparing breakfast, just like Eric. Percy was already ready to go to work, showing no interest in us. After what happened yesterday, Eric probably won't talk even after Percy leaves for work today. While sighing disappointingly, we watched Percy leave for work and then ate breakfast. After dropping Eric off at the childcare center, I was once again pondering his apologies on my way to work. As I walked into the office, lost in thought, and reached for my employee ID, I noticed something unfamiliar in my bag. What? This? Inside, there was a crumpled piece of paper, and as I cautiously opened it, there were words written on it. It was in clumsy child's handwriting, and I immediately knew Eric had written it. I'll definitely talk next time. Seeing the earnestly written words, I was filled with unease. Eric, who had never talked before, was now promising to talk, even using the word definitely. Although I was happy, I couldn't shake off my anxiety as I went to work. Then I realized something. Percy will be away soon. It was a natural thought. Percy was about to go on a business trip, leaving the house empty, so there would be no interruptions. This meant Eric could talk to me without fear of being scolded by Percy. Realizing this made me oddly satisfied, and I focused on my work. As the day Percy would leave the house approached, I saw him packing with excitement the day before. Since he was in a good mood, he didn't nitpick over every little thing like he usually does. That alone made a big difference in how I felt, but it seems Eric didn't feel the same way. He looked as if he had made a decision, remaining silent all the while. That day, Percy was set to leave earlier than usual. After we got up, Eric timidly woke up a little later.
I'll be going then. Make sure you don't do anything unnecessary.
Percy directed his last words to Eric as he was about to leave for the trip. The sound of the door slamming shut made Eric shudder in fear, gripping his own hands tightly. Just that alone was enough to understand how Percy usually treated Eric. "Good morning." As I spoke, I noticed Eric was almost crying. "What's wrong?" "That just now with Dad? Was scary, wasn't it?" Probably it wasn't just being yelled at as he was leaving. Percy has a habit of complaining as soon as he sees someone. So even on such a day, I thought he had complained when he encountered Eric. Knowing Percy would be away for a while brought us a short period of relief. Now, about to prepare breakfast, Eric tugged at the hem of my clothes. I was surprised, as he had never done such a thing before. But I met Eric's gaze. Yet Eric, looking like he was about to cry, apologized.
I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry.
Holding Eric as he cried big tears, I waited for him to calm down. It wasn't the best way to say it, but I decided to take this opportunity to ask him in detail. "You always apologize, but what happened? You put a letter in my bag the other day, right? Will you talk today?" I smiled gently and asked slowly. Then Eric nodded over and over, almost sobbing as he said,
I have something I've been keeping from you, Mom. I've been wanting to say it for a long time. But I was scared of Dad getting angry, so I couldn't. But I had to say it.
Trying hard to hold back his tears, Eric spoke. But his words overflowed, seemingly disorganized, making it hard for him to express himself clearly. I gently stroked his head as he cried again, waiting quietly. Rushing Eric at this moment wouldn't do any good, and it would only make him more anxious. From today, I can face Eric without any reservations. It's all right to take a day off from work and the childcare center today. I'll definitely talk next time. I wondered what Eric felt when he put those words in my bag. Confirming that was my priority. While thinking this, Eric seemed to calm down a bit. He was still hiccuping a little, but was now in a state where he could talk. The words he began to say and what he showed me left me utterly shocked.
Mom, actually,
Tentatively, Eric extended his hand to me. In it was a mobile phone I didn't remember buying for him. And even more so, the screen displayed something unbelievable. I quickly took the phone from Eric's hand and stared intently at the photo displayed. "What's this about?" As I asked, Eric clamped his lips tight, going silent. "It's okay," I urged. And then he started to say something unbelievable again.
This is the previous Mom.
Hearing those words, my eyes widened. I had been informed by Percy before we got married that his former wife had passed away. If not, it meant Percy was still lying to me. With trembling hands, I looked back and forth between the mobile phone's photo and Eric, trying to piece together the situation. Then, a pressing question came to mind, and I asked Eric, "What's this photo about? More importantly, why do you have this?" I tried to ask calmly, but the urgency of the situation made me rush. My tone might have been a bit accusatory. Eric, excited, yet trying to convey his message, said,
You see, this is from before. Dad gave it to me, for playing games, and then...
I realized my harsh tone was wrong, and Eric, getting excited, struggled to articulate his point. We decided to move to the living room and sit on the couch to calm down Eric. After a while, when both of us had calmed down, I decided to hear the whole story. First, I made calls to my office in the childcare center to face the situation head on. This way I thought I could focus on Eric without worrying about Percy or time. So I started by asking about the mobile phone Eric had. "Let me ask again, what's with this mobile phone? You said Dad gave it to you?"
Yeah, Dad gave it to me. It's his old one, for playing games.
So Percy gave his old mobile phone to Eric as a gaming device for him to pass the time. That explained why Eric had a mobile phone I didn't remember buying. Satisfied with this, I then inquired about the photo from earlier. "So what about that photo? What do you mean by previous mom?
It was in the phone, among the photos. It was the previous mom, not the current mom. You know.
The phone, he meant, and among the photos, referred to what exactly? I was a bit confused and activated the mobile phone Eric handed me. Instead of that specific photo, a folder filled with photos was displayed on the screen. Ah, so among the photos meant it was stored in a photo gallery app. Understanding this, I scrolled through the folder to see if there were any similar items, and then I found it. A video dated last month, when Percy said a meeting ran late and he came home late. I impulsively played the video to see what was on it. It showed a man and a woman in the act, and the man's voice was Percy's. The only saving grace was that the phone's volume was turned down, so the sound was barely audible. I turned my face towards Eric. There he was, biting his lip hard, trying to hold back tears. I threw the phone aside and hugged Eric, slowly rubbing his back. That was all I could do. Eric must have seen this video. I know a child's curiosity is unstoppable.
I didn't want it to be not Mom. The voice on the TV wasn't Mom's.
I hugged Eric as he started to cry again. All I could do was nod in agreement. Eric, being only 5, naturally wouldn't understand what the act in the video meant, but he could tell it was his father's voice. However, the woman's voice wasn't mine. That saddened him and he cried.
When I asked Dad, he got really, really angry at me, said not to tell Mom, and scolded me.
The mobile phone belonged to Percy, so Eric must have asked Percy about the video and photo. Maybe he innocently asked who this person was. Then Percy, of course, exploded in anger and scolded Eric, telling him not to tell me. Because of that, Eric felt like he had seen something he shouldn't have, and should apologize. If you've done something wrong, you apologize. He was applying that simple rule towards me, but he couldn't tell me the reason. Percy scolded him harshly, and despite being married to me, he was intimate with his ex-wife. It seemed Eric was also bothered about conveying such a thing. Understanding this much, I hugged Eric even tighter. I might have wanted to suppress the anger boiling inside me. The fact that Percy lied to me, involved Eric in this, and cheated with his ex-wife while married to me? These thoughts stirred anger within me, cooling my head gradually. I made sure not to scare Eric as I made a request. Hey, Eric, you can get mad at me later, but would you come with Mom? Hearing my words, Eric nodded again and again in agreement.
It's okay. I'm fine. I want to be with Mom. Dad scares me. I prefer being with Mom.
I smiled at Eric's desperate plea and told him to go wash his face. Watching Eric's back as he obediently went, I began to contemplate revenge on Percy. If it was just about me, I wouldn't mind. But I can't believe Percy would hurt his own son Eric and be okay with it. Eric might not be my son by birth, but I think of him as if he were. He used to laugh a lot when we first met, but I haven't seen him smile at all since we got married. The cause is Percy's infidelity, and yet Eric blames himself. I pondered what to do next. Perhaps making Percy fully pay for his actions is the best course. But what preparations are needed for that? And who can I rely on? As I thought this far, a certain existence came to mind. But then I shook my head. It might be possible if they were blood relatives, but with Percy's parents, it's uncertain whose side they take. If they sided with Percy and harmed Eric, then what about my own? I intended to resolve this alone, but now I think it's better to seek help from others. With that thought, I immediately used my mobile phone to make a call. But no one answered right away, and I impatiently panicked. While I was doing that, Eric came back from the bathroom and looked at me curiously. I gestured for silence by putting my finger to my lips, making sure he could see. Then I silently mouthed, "Shh." And finally, someone answered the phone. A few days later, Percy returned from his business trip. I immediately went out to meet him and told him we needed to talk.
Hey, can't you see? I'm exhausted from the long trip. It's about Eric, isn't it? Let's do this another time.
Percy tried to dodge the conversation, but I was not going to let him. I don't know where Percy had been, but I knew who he was with. It was late when he came back, and Eric was not here. So I could confront Percy without worrying about anything. That's not going to happen. It's about Eric, yes, but there's more than that. Don't think you can just run away from this. Maybe because I had never spoken to Percy in such a manner before, he furrowed his brows and turned to face me.
What's with that tone? It's really irritating. I'll say it again. I'm tired. Let's talk later.
He threatened me with a low voice, trying to intimidate me by yelling at close range. But such tactics no longer worked on me. Do you really think you can put it off? Unfortunately, I've heard everything. I heard it all from Eric on the morning you left. My words made Percy's face contort. No wonder. From what I've heard, he yelled at Eric, telling him not to tell me, in a terribly angry manner. He probably never thought Eric would actually tell me. But that couldn't be stopped. Eric, fully aware of the consequences, had been apologizing to me almost daily. Those apologies were probably not just for me.
What are you talking about? I didn't hear anything about this. Where did he go? To the bedroom? Is he asleep already?
Percy looked around for Eric, but Eric was not in the house. I had anticipated what would happen if I took action. Therefore, I had sent Eric to my parents' house to ensure his safety. You won't find him no matter how much you look. Knowing you would search for him, I've sent him to my parents' house for safety. Hearing this, Percy stopped in his tracks and turned back to face me. Then he slowly approached me, grabbed my shoulders, and shook me.
You saw it, didn't you? You saw it, right? If you heard that talk, it means you saw it, right?
I endured the fear while Percy violently shook me. Compared to the fear Eric had been carrying all this time, this was nothing.
Isn't that an invasion of privacy even for spouses? Did you tell him to show it to you? Yeah, that's right. I told him never to tell you, never to show it.
Even as I tried to break free, Percy kept coming closer, and I felt a deep fear. Thinking of how Eric must have felt made me want to apologize myself. Your privacy is less important than Eric's emotional wounds. That's far more serious.
All this Eric. Treat me with more care. Respect and pamper me.
Percy shouted like a child, stomping on the ground, making me wonder who the real child was. Faced with Percy's childish outburst, I was dumbfounded. If you want respect, earn it with your actions first. Lying about your ex-wife being dead, cheating on me, and telling your own child to keep quiet about your affair trip? What do you think of us?
So, you knew everything. I thought maybe you didn't understand since Eric talked to you. Well, if that's how it is, divorce is the only option.
Percy started talking about divorce, to which I immediately agreed. That's exactly what I want. But you understand, right? You'll pay alimony for hurting Eric, I said, shoving the divorce papers with my filled-out sections in front of Percy. Seeing the papers, Percy's face turned pale. Apparently, Percy thought he could escape while I or he went to get the divorce papers. I won't let you get away with it. I pressured Percy to fill out his sections. Pressed by my determination, Percy reluctantly agreed, but insisted on one thing.
I'm taking custody of Eric. That's non-negotiable.
What are you saying? I'll never hand him over, I retorted, and the argument about custody began. But I did not give in, and after Percy finished filling out the divorce papers, I quickly left the house. Percy chased after me, but I didn't look back and hurried to my parents' house. My parents' house is very close to ours. My parents were still alive, and when I took Eric there and told them everything, my father was furious. When I returned to my parents' house with the divorce papers, Eric was asleep. My mother was anxious, and my father was still angry. I showed the divorce papers to my father, and we discussed the future until dawn. As the sky began to brighten, we had a plan in place, and I decided to take a short nap. Eric was sleeping in the room I used to use before moving out. Watching his sleeping face, I reaffirmed my resolve. When public agencies started operating, my family and I visited various places. First, we went to the family court to submit the divorce papers, then looked for a lawyer. With my parents' help, we found a good lawyer, and Eric and I submitted evidence and testimony. After the review, it was decided to announce the details in person, and Percy was called in. Percy, appearing nonchalant, entered the lawyer's office and looked around for Eric. "It's no use looking. He's not here." At my words, with a displeased expression, Percy reluctantly settled with the lawyer. Then, the lawyer told Percy that it would be difficult for him to gain custody, and Percy started getting angry in the lawyer's office.
"Why is it difficult? He's my child."
"Think about what you've done before you say that. Don't you even feel like apologizing?" As I said this, Percy became genuinely angry and was taken to another room by himself to continue the conversation. While I was discussing with the lawyer, Percy began to cause a commotion in the other room, leading us to reluctantly call the police. Percy continued to make noise until the police arrived, during the explanation of various procedures. I became embarrassed, wondering why I ever married such a person, as Percy broke through other lawyers' and clerks' attempts to stop him and barged into the room I was in. Just as he was about to become violent, the police finally arrived. The moment the police entered, Percy was nearly apprehended for assault on the spot. Despite this, he continued to struggle, resulting in Percy's fist hitting a police officer's face. This led to charges of obstructing the execution of official duties, and Percy was finally taken to the police station. After the stormy presence of Percy was gone, the office informed me they had no intention of representing Percy. It was understandable. Feeling apologetic, I helped clean up the disheveled office. During this, my parents and Eric, who had been sheltered in another room, came out. Eric's eyes were red, as if he had been crying. I had hoped not to put him through such fear, yet I ended up doing just that. But Eric rubbing his eyes helped us clean up. Praised by various people, including my parents, Eric's smile returned. I felt like I saw Eric's genuine smile for the first time. Though Percy was eventually released from police custody, he lost custody of Eric. The parents-in-law came to pick him up, but they were cold towards him after hearing the situation from me. In addition to facing the payment of compensation and bail, Percy found himself in even worse straits. After I sent a certified letter detailing the incident to Percy's company, he was fired. This meant that even after being released, he was shunned by his company and had no place to return to work. Furthermore, it seemed he was disowned by his parents-in-law and couldn't even pay the mortgage on his house. With the need to pay compensation, bail, and the house mortgage, but no place to work, what is Percy planning to do? Though financially punished, I am not yet ready to forgive him for just this. I had a restraining order issued through a lawyer, keeping Eric away from the threat named Percy. Percy seemed furious upon learning this, but seemed to have given up on getting involved with the police again. He quietly went back to doing day labor, working to repay everything. Living through such days, I was informed by the lawyer. Honestly, it didn't matter to me, but knowing what he was doing now brought me more peace of mind. With that, we were freed from Percy's oppression, feeling refreshed and relieved. However, I still have some lingering regrets. It's about the ex-wife I was told had passed away. After having the lawyer investigate, it turns out Percy had divorced her before he approached me. The reason was her habit of cluttering, but it seems Percy stopped caring about that once they were separated. That doesn't mean it was okay for him to commit adultery while married to me. But from my perspective, I want to prioritize Eric over my relationship with Percy, which had long lost its affection. I thought about imposing some punishment on the ex-wife too, but I didn't want to expose Eric to any more conflict. Eric and I may not be related by blood, but I think of him as my true son. I'd rather pretend Percy and his affairs never existed and consider Eric as if I had adopted him. With the divorce now finalized, Eric is truly free. Even now, after everything has ended, Eric still tends to apologize, but he's starting to smile more. From now on, I hope to live a happy life with Eric, with help from my parents, believing that Eric's habit of apologizing will eventually heal as we lead a happy life together.